Hello, everybody. I'm Tetsuzen Jason Wirth of the Seattle University EcoSangha, a Zen practice group. And I'm going to begin, like I always begin, by putting on my Raksu. This is a very ceremonial act in which I signal that I am entering into a place of practice, and our practice is deep listening and deep learning and deep discovery. And our practice this time is with a very special person, Ray Williams, who I've admired for many years. Really, I think somebody who has a way of thinking and seeing that is of critical importance for all peoples and deeply linked to what is very, very powerful in this part of the world. So Ray, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Glad to see you.
Thank you.
And I think it would be nice if we could begin if you could just tell our audience a little bit about yourself, your background, a little bit your personal story.
Sure, thank you. Well, let's see. I went to a public school from kindergarten forward to the graduated out of high school, the Connor High School in 1970, and I remember it's interesting that I believe they called him the counselor that we had at that time. We were deciding what was our strong points and our strong suits, and he was a good friend too. He's also my football coach. They did the interviews and they found out that the best thing for me to be focusing on at that time was I selected to go to a Seattle Central Gompers branch of carpentry apprenticeship program. My brother and I were sent out to that, and in those days there wasn't a lot of people leaving the reservation, and so they had a program for us to come to get orientated to the city here, and then my brother and I got an apartment and went to school. And it's after that first year we went through the apprentice program, and I realized that that was the federal education program, the Indian monies, that they allowed for just about enough for us to stay hungry and concerned about our future in that manner. And so I went back home and back to the Swinomish res and went to work for 2 years and decided that I would save my money and go back to school. And so I saved up for the 2 years and went to Skagit Valley College, received an associate's there in what they call at that time a mid-management business course. And I realized that there must be something more than that, and so I worked for 2 more years to make some more money, and it was really nice too. I got first 2 years I worked for the housing authority as a carpenter to try to see whether or not I had any future in that work, and it seemed to be far too hard, and it just seemed like there must be something else for me in life. And so I went back to work after the first 2 years of that mid-management course and became a bioengineer for the tribe, Swinomish tribe, and it was marine biology, so I was working with salmon quite a bit, and it's really kind of challenging. But during the winter months, it's just walking those rivers and surveying the streams and the red counts and the rest of that. I was saying, well, this doesn't excite me too much either, so I figured that there must be something else out there. So I did that for 2 years and saved enough money to go back to school again, and decided that my sister, my oldest sister, she thought that I, for some reason, that I would do well in a law program, and in particular Indian law. And she found this program, the scholarship program, that was sending 50 students to the University of New Mexico, the Indian law program there. And she kept on trying to talk me into taking the test to see whether or not I was even had any talent in there. And I just said, I've never had any interest in law. And so I said, well, just to satisfy her, she asked me several times. I said, okay, I'll take the test. And every state had the Native Americans take their tests out of their state. The top two in that state were granted this full scholarship to go to the law program. This is back in the days when we just started our tribal court system, and so they needed prosecutors, then they needed defenders, public defenders, and they needed people who were going to run the court system. And so it was Deloria that got the grant program together, and it was really beautiful handle operation. We were down there and we're with students from all over the United States, and so we got to get a nice introduction to the cultures of the United States. Native people, especially those who wanted to protect their rights, the sovereign rights of their people. That's why we all went to school, and so it was really beautifully designed. And what I realized more than anything else is that even though it was a law that got me to that university there, that my attention and my energy shifted to the healers, the teachers, the elders of the Navajo and the Hopi, and they adopted us, some of us, and we went into their society, into their ceremonial world, and it was just such a beautiful and enlightening time for me to see how wealthy they were with understanding the universe and understanding the elements of the earth and understanding creation in just such a comprehensive manner. I was just so impressed with it. I was saying, I was asking myself, what am I doing studying law when I could be hanging out with these elders here? Anyway, so that was my stint at law school. I graduated out of the program, became a prosecutor for a neighboring tribe from the Lemhi tribe, and I realized that wasn't really what I wanted to do with my life. It didn't feel right for me to impose fines and that sort of thing on people who were just trying to live in a cultural way on the reservation. And so I went back to school again and studied business administration with an emphasis on tribal management, and that got me out of the res for about 7 years, total of 7 years, and I came back home. My brother called me up, and my father had had a heart attack out in the woods, and he worked out there as a logger all of his life, and he was really too weak to go back out there. And so our family had to make a decision who's going to stay home and take care of our father till he gets mended. And I was the only one had a loose ends at that point. All my brothers and sisters were married and had jobs and careers, and I was still at the university. And so I was sort of voted in to come back home to help my dad. I stayed with him for 2 years and worked with him and helped him wherever I could. And it was at that time that the elders came to me and said that your time for studying is over in the universities. It's time for you to learn what you need to know about being Coast Salish. And it was just probably the most beautiful time of my life to be able to have the elders. My mother passed away in 72. I was 19 years old. What they say, our elders said to us at that time, is that there's a small window that opens up, and that window allows the knowledge to flow into us. There's the offspring of this beautiful lady that we seen as our mother, and it's open for 1 year. And so if you are able to focus in on what your mother was sharing with you as far as values are concerned and what she demonstrated to you, those can be absorbed into your entire system, and that you can walk with that for the rest of your life. Not only those, but those ancient knowledge that comes along with that bring it back to time immemorial, is what they say. And so I thought, wow, this is 19 years old. I thought, wow, I don't know, I can accept this as being the way it is. But I tried my hardest. I just hung on to those words the elder shared. that was in '72, and '89 my father passed away, and I got to spend the last 2 years with him, and so it was really a touching time for me, a really enlightening time, and it was like there was a freedom that my father had those last 2 years that I never seen in him all those years before. He was so busy making money for us, working really hard, and I got a chance to get to see him as a elder and as a teacher, and it changed my whole way of seeing my father. And he was a chronic alcoholic at that time, but I didn't see him as that. I seen him as this broken man who missed all of his teachers, all of his my mom, his wife, and all those ones that he traveled with. And he even said that to me time and time again. He just said it's lonely here. And I said, you have your grandkids to think about. You should focus on them. And he was just so empty that he didn't feel like living any longer. And remember, there's an elder that came. He passed away now too. He came to me, and I was doing some workshops up at the college, Northwest Indian College, and he was a professor there, and he'd pick me up every morning and bring me to the campus about 40 miles away. And so we had all this time to talk, and gave him an opportunity to really get to see where my emotions were with my dad. And he told me one thing that I thought was really so valuable, that he said, I watched your family grow up, and I seen how hard your dad worked all of his life to provide for you. Whatever you guys needed, he would make sure that you had that. And he said that he did his job. He worked really well, really hard, and now he wants to move. He wants to go home. And maybe what you should do is, rather than try to convince him to stay, is to make him comfortable as long as he's here with you. And that shifted everything. So for the last year, that's all I did was made him comfortable. I cooked breakfast for him and made sure that he had his meals, and we'd go out for rides, and we would talk about these things that we didn't have time to talk about before, and it was really beautiful. He said this to me, I thought it was really interesting. He was so busy working that he didn't really get involved with the culture and the spirit of our people. But then I realized that he did, because he would send food to feed the people in the ceremonies. And my mother would go and cook for the people, and they did what they could to support the spirit and the culture of our people, but they never got involved with the singing of the songs and going through the initiation. And they actually advised us to find a way to embrace this education that was in the public school system, to learn as much as we could, and that was our future. And the last 2 years of Dad's life, especially the last year when I wasn't trying to convince him to do anything other than just be his friend, respected elder, and he told me that, he said that don't be concerned about your future. He said, and you come from four very rich lines of red paints, of the healers, of the teachers, of the medicine carriers of our people. You come from those 4 lines. You have a wealth of experience that can be used in those areas, and so don't be concerned about your future. I thought, oh my God, this is my dad saying this, and I think he really had an opportunity to see that I was confused about my future. How do I contribute to my people if all I know is this education thing? And he reminded me that the true teachers are those ones that came before us, and those ones that are sitting around us as elders, and the forest that is out there that we need to protect. And more than that, we need to communicate with the nature itself and to become one with it, to be able to receive a lot of valuable information. And so there's a real shift in my my thought process at that time. It was at that time in '89 when my father passed away that both my parents were gone, and that gave all the elders from the different communities, that gave them the opportunity to, in a sense, adopt me and to take me aside and start teaching me the ways of our people. And '89 was really a fortunate time for me too, as I was asked to travel around the world, mainly the Western Hemisphere, but that led to the rest of the world, and the door opened up for these beautiful teachings, rich teachings, to come, and I'd come back from wherever I was at in Central or South America, meeting with the indigenous people, and sit with the elders and say, this is what they're saying. How do I respond to this? Or this is what the United Nations is asking at this particular moment. How do we respond to this? And so we went deeper and deeper into the ways of our people. And to me, it made a whole lot of sense to use as my base of knowledge the elders who were around at that time. There happened to be 13 elders that I spent an awful lot of time with in those last 28 years, and now there's one left out of those 13. And so what they said to me was really something too. They seen that I was getting a little bit saying, who do I go to when you're all gone? And I remember Margaret Green, she's passed away about this last summer, and a beautiful teacher. We were up in the mountains, and I asked her to come up to bless some cedar trees that we were going to use back on the res. And so we spent the day up there, and she ended up sharing a lot of knowledge with me. And I said, this is the last vision that I had, and I shared the vision with her. And I was bringing her home, so we're going through Chuckanut Drive. She lives up in this Lemhi tribe at that time, Lemhi reservation, and the sun was just setting, and she said, can you pull over? And there's a little observation area there, so I pulled over to watch the sunset, and she said to me at that time, she says, you know, there's going to come a time when the ones that you're going to go to are up there in the mountains, the old growth forest. Those would be your teachers. The purified nature of the glacier-fed streams, that'll be your teachers. The wind that goes through the trees, the forest, that'll be your teacher. And I thought, that's beautiful in a big sense, but it's really what she was saying is that there's going to come a time when we're no longer here with you. And I thought, oh my God, is she saying goodbye to me? And she wasn't saying goodbye, she was introducing me to the rest of my life, and it was beautiful. Anyway, that's kind of we went from the public school system to come back home eventually to be able to spend some time with my father, and then that introduced me to the series of elders, and then the elders were the ones who set the tone for the rest of my life. I would go to them with my visioning, that I'd have the dreams in the nighttime, and they were just kept on coming. They kept on coming, and so I'd be sitting with the elders quite a bit, and they would share with me what I needed to know. The really beautiful thing about it, though, is that when you're very transparent in terms of having the confidence to trust the elders and the wisdom and the teachings that come from rich, beautiful world. That it's almost like the future opens up for the ancestors to continue to feed you these things that are going to become interesting. I never thought about it that way. They're going to become footnotes to the history of our people going, making our way back to the teachings, back to this way of being. And there's people who talk a lot about this is such a pivotal time, and that we just have a short window to turn this around and that sort of thing. And really, I don't believe that we need to be so concerned about reacting to the existing reality and all that destruction that is going on out there. What we need to do is to turn our attention toward the wisdom that is out there waiting for us. And they will show us, they will lead us back on the path that's going to, in the sense of a conversation that I was in, started about a year ago. There's a movement now for us to become into alignment with the elemental, what people have referred to as the elemental mothers, the earth, air, wind, and fire. And so when that unfolded, Father Pat and I actually had a conversation about it. We came back from a Jesuit volunteer orientation with them, and coming back from Oregon, I shared with him, I said, I had this teaching that took place about 18 years ago. The elder passed away that was sharing that with me, and then she came back 3 months ago in a dream, and she wanted to remind me of that teaching time, but also that there was one thing that she wanted to remind me of, and that we actually have the ability to return to that alignment of the elemental order of God's creation. I thought, oh my God, oh my God. Where do you get that? You don't find that too often, but when you do find it, when you do find those messages that come, they come very clearly. You can't help but focus much more time and energy on that. How do we move toward that? How do we find ourselves returning to that restorative relationship to God's creation?
You once shared a phrase with me that stuck with me for a long time: indigenous mind. And I heard that on at least two levels. One, it reminded me of my own practice, where we tried to cultivate Zen mind, really to get back to the ancient ways, get away from all the dumb and stupid ways that our mind and our eyes work on the default mode. But at the same time, Zen knows that it has to discover its place. And this is not Japan. This is the northwestern coast of Turtle Island. This is river country. Indigenous mind also has a deep sense that this place is really this place. It's not any place. You're not at home everywhere. You love everywhere by knowing what it is to be where you are. So I would just invite you now to share some things with what you mean by indigenous mind.
Well, yeah, thank you. That's boy. I'll start out by saying that the indigenous mind, that we're all wired into that, and it just so happens to me, my sense of it anyway, of this is that because we're all a part of the Mother Earth, that there's songs and there's dances and there's ceremonies that are imprinted and coded into all different territories on the earth itself, and we as the human presence upon those spiritual points throughout the earth that have been created by this mind, this relationship. The indigenous mind is really about our relationship to sacred, to the spirit itself, the relationship to the water and to the air and the fire or the spirit of the fire, the purified nature of the fire, and the Mother Earth itself. And so what we have is we have these encodings that are all around the Mother Earth, and we can retrieve that knowledge, whether we're here in the Pacific Northwest, or whether we're in Ireland, or whether we're in Egypt, or whether we're down in Central America or South America, and we're relocated, to here to the Great Northwest. We can retrieve those pockets of knowledge, those beautiful relationships. They're really easy. I shouldn't say that. They're available for us, and the way that we do that is this is going to really be interesting. The way that we've understood to do that is the first term that came out was down in South America. A good friend, Luis Marcus, the Quichua people of Ecuador, Andean region. He said that we must eradicate the Western constructs of thought. And I thought, oh my God, that sounds rather violent. It sounds like it's really going to be an interesting conversation from this point forward. And what I realized was that it wasn't even, I shouldn't say that either. I don't want to. What I understand today is that what we should do is go back to those songs and those dances and those ceremonies that open up that envelope of that ancient knowledge, that wisdom that comes. There's chants, and there's meditation, and there's all these rituals that can be brought back to life. And the interesting thing for me is that as long as it centers us, as long as it opens up those avenues to the sacred, that's where we're going. And they don't. I keep on thinking about this. As long as we're able to get back that way, and what I realized now is that there are some, such as us here in the Coast Salish territory, that still practice those ways. We've never been disconnected from those ways of being. And so for those who are a little bit confused or a little bit lost, it's not for you to adopt our ways, but to understand how we access that, and that you can access it as well through your teachings and your knowledge and your expression. And it won't necessarily take you to the streams or the rivers that are here throughout the Coast Salish territory. They can take you back to the rivers of your origin. And that's the exciting part to me. It's beautiful. And our mind is such... I'll share with you a snippet of a vision that came that spoke about the power of our mind. There was two good friends when I was working as a prosecutor for the Lummi tribe. There were two elders that would come to visit me, and they'd tell me story after story after story, just beautiful, and they're just rich with stories. And I didn't quite understand what it was that why they selected me to come to talk to about this. But I was officially on duty I had represented the best interests of the tribe in the court system, and these two men would come up and tell me stories about the old ways, about the ancient knowledge and things. And I really loved the time that I was with them, but I was saying, why would you want to be doing this with me? And I come to find out that they both passed away. And then they came back to me in a dream, a vision, and they shared with me what it meant to be there in that room, to share these teachings with me, that they're building up in my memory these ways to go back to the old. And then they came to me in a vision and in a dream after they both had passed away, and they started sharing more specific. And so I put the pieces together, and it's really beautiful. To be able to weave this storyline, this knowledge that takes you back to a place when before all of this, before this development, and before this technology, and before, it's really cool because they'll say this too. It came in a conversation at one time, and I believe it came from the ancestors. There was this this talk around the DNA and being able to follow that back, and I thought, well, that's interesting. So the dream and the thought came to me. What was before the DNA? What was before that? Before this physical form? And they, through the dream time, through the vision process, they took me back to this place. And so it's really like the DNA is they take a look at that as being a major stride, a breakthrough in understanding, and it's only the beginning. It's only the beginning of understanding, of knowing, and it's really about the science of knowing, and not about the spirit of knowing. And so, when we're able to transition from the intellectual side of the science of knowing to the spirit of knowing, that's when we're going to really have some conversations to share with each other, I think, anyway. But I believe that there's much more solutions, much more availability to this harmonious relationship with all of creation that comes from our spiritual side of ourself, and that we need to, and that for me, even science has danced around this for some time. Has said that we only use maybe 10% of the capacity of the physical brain of itself, and I said, well, gee, that should tell us something, you know. And for me, I think it's much more than that. I think that there was an elder that I listened to this one time from Alaska, and he said this. He said that every cell in our body has the ability to absorb knowledge, has the ability to express knowledge. Every pore has the ability to receive this knowledge that's all around us, that we have to really fix our mind on opening up to that avenue of experiencing this rich unfolding of God's creation. And he wouldn't, I don't believe God would have, the creator of all, I don't believe he would have put all these things in our world, in our way, in our presence, without giving them the instructions so that we could save ourselves from our own ignorance and our own arrogance. And so, to me, that's where the story begins with our spiritual ways, is that we become in harmony and relationship with God's creation, and through God's creation, it opens up these opportunities and these sense of knowing the responsibility of what is our role, and how do we engage in that in our life. And it's not necessarily about the economy. There's the interesting thing. I was with the elders 20-some years ago, and they handed me this packet. They said, we just came from a conference, and can you take a look at this? And there's up in the Canada, up in Vancouver Island, the elders came together and they talked about what does the economy mean to us before contact. So I reviewed this, read these beautiful writings, and they basically said that the economy for us is going back to they would call it bartering today, and that bartering in the ways of the spirit is not to get as much as you can in exchange for whatever that they have, but it is to, whatever you have, but it's to give the individual that you're working with more than they need, so that we'll build this relationship with the nations around us, or with the families around us, and that they'd be eager to come back to trade with us, and that it's more about satisfying the relationship than it is about obtaining or maintaining wealth in any nature. And I think for me, it makes sense to me today that. So I asked the elders, said, how about if we do something to start bringing that back? What would you suggest that we do first? They said, well, there's another side to this too. Say if we're going to take send some runners up to, let's just use Alaska as an area, and go up to visit with the indigenous people up there. We'd send some messengers up, and we'd ask if they'd be interested in engaging in this relationship building with trade. And if they, when they say yes, what we'd do is we'd say we're going to bring our people up to have a conversation with you, but we want to ask you to bring your most sacred tools, your most sacred ceremonies to this event. And when we'll bring our same thing, we'll bring the most sacred tools and ceremonies to this as well, and we'll open up and ask the ancestors to come to negotiate for each of our sides and to make the agreements that we'll make sure that the presence of the sacred is there and that the ancestors will come and speak through us as we're looking at how do we embrace each other in a way that makes sense to the traditions, the rich traditions of our time. Anyway, so I think about that. Indigenous mind to me is the ability to block out this Western constructs of thought, whether it's in terms of economy, whether it's in terms of religion, whether it's in terms of academic structures, whether it's in terms of the military mind. It doesn't really matter. You set those aside and you go back and you find a way back to that purest form of knowing, that purest form of being in relationship to nature itself. That's what I believe the indigenous mind has to offer at this point.
Yeah, that's a revolutionary proposal, and much needed, I would say. You know, the old ways are no good if they're just stuck in the past. They have to be brought back to speak to new times and new challenges. They have to be kind of new old ways, the old ways for our times.
Right.
What do you think the old ways have to speak to today? What are the challenges for the old ways?
It reminds me of a I just came back from Washington, D.C. During 9/11, during that major event, and I was back there, just happened to be back there as a representative for the Swinomish tribe, and the attorney that traveled with me were really good friends, and got back there, and I had this dream 3 days before we left, and it showed me this building that I had never been in before, and it showed me all these beautiful things, and it showed me a little secret, just so I'd remember that this is what they were wanting me to see. And anyway, so we were back there, and all of a sudden, I remember there was 200 tribes. We were at a conference that was talking about sovereignty and treaty rights and that sort of thing. And so the first speaker that morning was Senator Inouye, and he was doing this really, really beautiful opening for this conference, and a page or something, one of the representatives for Senator Inouye came up to the stage and whispered in his ear, and he just nodded and acknowledged it, and then he kept on speaking, and then probably about 10 minutes later, maybe 15, whatever that was, this same person came up to the stage again and whispered in his ear. And Senator Inouye said, I really have to apologize. I'm going to have to excuse myself to go back to the Hill, and we're going to have to make some decisions. So the first message came was that the one tower was struck by a plane, and when the second, they said that would be a terrible accident, incredible, terrible accident. But when the second tower was targeted, they knew that they had to make some decisions. There was something big going on, and so he excused himself. And one thing he said before he left was, he said, this is really important, this work here, and I know it's going to be disrupted. And he said, I want to leave you with this story, then I'll leave you with some instructions. And so he said, people ask me, why is it that I stand so firmly in terms of sovereignty and treaty rights and those sort of things? And I was sitting back at home in Oahu, and my grandson was sitting on my lap, and we were watching something, and all of a sudden this bulletin came across the TV. Some decision was being announced from back in D.C., and my grandson, he turned around and looked me right in the eye and said, "How did you stand on this? What did you say about this?" And he realized at that time that he could no longer compromise at all the future of his grandson, or the future of the children that are coming toward us at this time. And he said, "I wanted to leave that with you. You remain strong, and you remain here representing not only your interests but the interests of the generations that are coming toward us." And then he said this too. I thought it was rather interesting that he says, "I have a feeling that the phones, the communication is going to be really crazy, and that they're going to have to cut off the cell phone power." And so he said, "What I would suggest is that you do what you have to do right now, and that you go and make some calls back home, let your family know that you're all right, and then we'll deal with whatever comes forward." And so the 200 of us natives and our friends, our colleagues that were there, our tribal members, we formed a circle and offered a prayer. And then they excused us, and they said, "Come back, in an hour or so, and we'll decide what we're going to do." Anyway, I was thinking about, in a way, and I was thinking about the threat that was coming toward us, and in terms of that attack on the Turtle Island. And as it unfolded, the planes were no longer permitted to fly, so we waited around there for a couple of days, and then we decided to rent a car and drive back home. Took 4 days to drive back home. Got back home just in time for a gathering that was going on. There was an annual event, a canoe races were going on, so the big celebration that was going on in the resident was like, this is really odd. The rest of the world, or the rest of the United States anyway, was just kind of saying, what do we do now? A lot of anger and a lot of whatever fear and whatever emotions were there. And got back home, and there was this canoe race that's going on, and it had been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so there was the elders sitting on the beach there, and this media guy, this newspaper guy, for some reason he had found me, and he said, "You just came back from Washington D.C. And he said, "I wanted to ask you a question." And I thought, well, if it's a question in relation to what just took place, I would suggest you go ask that elder over there. And it was Bert Dan, a beautiful elder in our tribe, and sitting down on a little fold-up chair watching the canoes go by. And I went over and I asked Bert, I said, "Bert," I said, "this newspaper man wants to ask you a question about what just took place." And I said, "Would you want to respond to that?" And she says, "Who, me? Oh," like that. And then she says, "Sure." And so the newspaper guy knelt down and said, what would your people's response, meaning the Swinomish tribe or the Coast Salish people, what would your people's response be to what just took place if it happened on your land?" And Bert Dan, she smiled, and she said something I'll never forget. She said, "First of all, we never would allow this to get to this point." Said, "In our culture and our society, when we see something that is out of order, we go and we address it right now. We don't let it build up and build up and build up until next thing you know, there's people that are dying and people that are being harmed and things. That's not the way that we've learned how to live our lives." And so there's something really out of order here, and we can't just look at these ones that attacked us. We have to look at it inside ourselves and say, how do we fix this? How do we work with this? And I thought, oh my God, this is beautiful. I mean, I went over to D.C. to to represent our interests at the level of sovereignty and treaty rights and that sort of thing. But I come back home to this beautiful sunny day and all this activity going on, and the teacher is sitting right there waiting, to be heard. And I thought, to me, that's really beautiful. I see that the wisdom comes from the way of understanding who you are and the place that you belong. And when those things come into order, we realize that this is enough for us for today. This is enough. And I wish that people in the United States and around the world could find that feeling of being at home in the place that you're planted right now. That the world could change overnight if we understood that.
That very powerful story reminds me that it's really quite a good analogy for the climate emergency and the ecological crisis more broadly.
Mm-hmm.
We could see, if we chose to see, this has been going on for a long time, and it was clearly already an emergency by the 1970s. Yes. But already by then it was an old story. You could have seen this in the 18th century, 19th century.
Yes.
But by the 1970s, no rational person could deny what was happening to the earth. And another 40 years go by and hand-wringing happens, but we allowed it to get to this. We allow it to get worse and worse. So what would you say to the cast of mind in which, not even an environmental 9/11 wakes us up?
Yeah.
What does it take to wake up such sleeping, lost people?
Boy. I go back to the elders a lot, and the elders back in probably 15 years ago now, I was sitting in a circle with them and asking a similar question, and it was like we forgot. I shouldn't put it that way. I don't want it to be. We've set down this understanding of how interconnected that we are with everything of God's creation. And it's time for us to open up our spiritual selves, our prayer life, our way of teaching the next generation and having the next generation teach us how to see again, the children, how to see this ability to weave back the fabric of this sacred relationship. There's so much to this that's so simple, so simple. We tend to create these. I'll just say this, that our mind is really a beautiful and powerful tool that we have that we rarely use anymore, and that what we need to do is to open that up, open up the channel of communication, not with science, and I feel bad about saying this, but religion as well. A lot of religions have compromised their integrity. I'll use this story. They're all about stories, and I'm really close to Father Pat Tui, and been in relation to Father Pat, and along with him the Jesuit Society, the Oregon Providence here in the Northwest, for 30 years now. And must have been 5 years or so back in that area. There's these big things that were coming in relation to the Jesuits of the Oregon Providence, and they eventually had to file for bankruptcy, and there was offenses that were against our people. Some of them very, very sad and unfortunate. And they needed to come back together to try to figure out, what do we do? We have no money, and our reputation is in question, and our future is in question, and what do we do with this? And so I knew that was coming to the floor. So I went to the elders before I went down to that meeting, and I sat with them and said, this is what's going on at this gathering, and they're going to ask for advice. And I'd really appreciate it if you could give me some sort of advice when I go down there. And they said this. They said it's really, really simple. To me, anyway, it was. They said we have our society, our Sion, our Longhouse society, has been attacked on all sides for a long, long time, and there was a point when we didn't know whether or not it would be able to survive all of these attacks. And what we decided to do was to go back and to hold on to the very strongest of our teachings, our knowing, our understanding of this relationship back into the woods, and to carry on that work, and to, when the time was right for us to start building from that beautiful presence that was never disconnected. And so that's where they're at right now. They need to really make sure that they understand what was the founding principles of their society, and to go back and to protect them, and not worry about all these other things that are going on right now, to go back and to protect those sacred teachings, those sacred knowings. And eventually things will be in more open to them coming back out, and to make sure that they have those rich teachings that they can rebuild from. And so for me, that's really where we're at as well, as far as we need to go back and remember what it was that got us here in the first place, what it meant to those ones who, they say, discover fire. I don't think that's the case. I think they were gifted with the fire, and they most likely had vision, and they showed them how to do this, how to create this beautiful energy, how to be able to find some food source in the oceans and in the rivers and in the lakes, in the streams, and the relationship between ceremony and thankfulness, gratitude for that ability for that salmon or that species to give their life so that we can carry on ours. There's the connections, the sacred connections that we have to remember, we have to recall them. For absent of those, what we'll have is scientific minds trying to figure out how do we get ourselves out of this mess. We get ourselves out of this mess by going back to our roots, going back to our understanding of how sacred all these things are.
Yeah, one of the many horrible Trump appointees has said, well, the ecological disaster and climate warming, that's just an engineering problem. And of course, it's the worst thing you could say, although he's right, but not in the way that he knows. It's an engineering problem, as in a problem created by the engineering mind.
Right.
Engineering is not the solution.
Yes.
But that also reminds me of something you once said that struck me very deeply, that the newcomers really don't know how to be here. That really they would be wise to learn from those who know how to be here, better how to be here. What is a good way to learn? What is a good way to have a dialogue in which we can all learn to be better who we are by being where we are, knowing how to be where we are.
Yeah. It reminds me of a question that I asked a friend over in Oahu several years back, and he was his grandmother, or no, his mother was sitting right here in a wheelchair, and she was, of course, the basis for the knowledge that he carried, and I seen that right away. And we walked in, and we were funding some of his work, we being Seventh Generation Fund, and I was a board member there, so I was out to take a look at, do a site visit, and so I went in, and they knew we were coming, so they were waiting, and I asked, I said, so tell me, because we went into this beautiful, beautiful area, but there's a parking lot down below where the Western medicine for the tribe, or for the people, the indigenous people of the island, it was right there. It had the pharmacy, and it had the doctors and that sort of thing, and then up a little higher was where this traditional medicine was, and where this elder was sitting, and so I asked him, we had talked for a while, and I said, please tell me, what's the difference between the way that you do your work here and the work that's going on down below, that Western medicine? And he looks at his mother, and she nods her head, and he said, the way that we see this work is that it's a privilege to be able to help people to understand how to relate to the medicine plants, to understand how to relate to the spirit that lives in all things, and to be able to move that energy around. And so when a person comes in as wounded as they are, or as broken as they are, and come in through that door there, we don't see them in that physical reality. We see them as an honorable spirit that needs some help, and we treat them that way. I think that that's really beautiful, and that all of this I like what David Suzuki had said in a book that he had written. It's about the life of a Douglas fir, I believe it was called, and he spoke about the relationship between that tree that stood in the forest and the plentifulness of the salmon that were running up that stream. And it spoke about the wisdom that came from the creator of all, that said that we know that there's going to be forest fires that are going to come and decimate all of this area. And so we need to create a backup system, and this backup system is going to say that this seed will not become germinated until it reaches a certain amount in temperature, high degree of temperature, and that it just so happens that a forest fire creates that amount of heat. And so it's really beautiful how these things have been structured, and all we have to do is to realize that the footprint of the creator of all is in everything, and that all we really need to do is to take the time to look for that again, to find that again. Not with our scientific mind, but with our spiritual mind, with our mind of knowing, of understanding that this is really about understanding that we are the weakest of species. We are the ones that God prepared all this for, because he knew we couldn't figure it out on our own. He gave us all these beautiful relatives to help us. And I think there was the elders from down in South America. We were at a conversation, and they said, well, the conversation came to, what are we going to do about these quote foreigners that came in and have placed this wedge of doubt in our mind and in our relationship to each other as humans and to each other as the creation here. And the other stood up and he said, we have to embrace them. That's our younger brother. there. He just needs to take a little bit more time, and we can teach him. We can teach him how to conduct his life on this earth, and it's our responsibility to do that.
Yeah. Well, much of the news in this region has been the tremendous victory of the Lummi people over the coal terminal, and then much more recently, for really the whole world, indigenous and otherwise, the really extraordinary winning of round one of Standing Rock.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see going forward are going to be the challenges at that level, the challenges and opportunities?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've been very struck by the extraordinary success and power of indigenous voices to really break through on what seemed to be the unstoppable forces of capital.
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah. It's really odd that I think about a good friend, David Corton, just across. We just came from Bainbridge Island, did a field trip over there, and David Corton has written a couple of, probably 3 or whatever, international bestsellers on that very question. And I remember it was back in '92. We were down in Rio de Janeiro for the Earth Summit. 10 years later, we were over at, I can't remember the name of that college, alternative college, just down by Lake Washington. He was doing a talk there as a keynote speaker 10 years after the Earth Summit, and they asked me to come to do the opening blessing and to welcome the people to this territory. So I thought, oh, this is going to be interesting. So I took care of that work, and then he was the next one came up, so I listened to his words, and I thought, I have to spend some time with this one here, get to know more about him. And he said this, he said, there's a question that or a statement that he had made, and I said, can you put some numbers to this? What he said was that because of the economic conditions and other realities that are going on in the United States presently, that there are pockets of energy, of human energy, that's able to hear the words that are coming from the spiritual voices of the land, and so I was going to ask him the question, but he had a real long line of people that were waiting to ask him similar questions, I suppose, and so I thought, oh well, I'm going to go get a bite to eat, and I'll come back, and the line will be shorter. Sure enough, I got back from lunch, and there was only 3 there, so I stepped in line, and I was the last one, and so he said, please, I'm going to bring these books out to the car, walk with me, and so we walked out. I was helping carry his books out, and he said that he said this number has come to mind, that when it gets to this point, that 50 million people here in the United States are going to be ready to listen, ready to hear, to receive this. So that's when the shift's going to happen. And I thought, where did you come up with 50 million? But I didn't want to ask him that question, so I just kind of let it rest. And anyway, so I was going up to visit an elder up north of us, and I was listening to NPR, and NPR had said that, I think that was probably 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago now, maybe it's several years, when that big thing happened, and people lost their homes and lost their jobs, and said that 50 million people had slid from middle class to poverty. And I said, 50 million, that's an interesting number. I said, maybe it's time for us to go to work. Yeah. So the Creator and the ancestors are going to find a way for people to open up their minds and their eyes and their ears. And it's only our responsibility at that point is to identify those who are ready to go to work, and to welcome them and invite them in and say, let's do this work together.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to listen to you, of course, it's to be struck immediately by the power of storytelling. What is storytelling for you?
Another story is gonna. I woke up one morning, 15 years ago, maybe 18 now, in that area, and it was a Jesuit workshop that I was at the night before. They were on our reservation, and the gentleman said he had heard me tell these different things that I'd been receiving. He says, "Do me a favor, and put a notepad next to your nightstand there, next to your bed, and sometimes you might forget those things, so don't bother turning the light on or anything like that. You can just scribble it just so you can read it the next morning." He says you should write down those notes and then go back to sleep again, so you don't lose those thoughts. And I said, okay. So this was the first time that I used this Jesuit, his father. I was trying to give the father. He just slipped my mind. Father Dick Mercy. He passed away about several years ago now too, and he said, "Do that for me, would you?" And so maybe a week or so passed by, and sure enough, here comes this little statement, and so I wrote it down on this pad. And next morning, I forgot about it. Next morning, I looked on the table and I said, "Oh, look, I wrote something down," and what it was these three simple words: one with creation. And that doesn't bring anything to mind for me, so I better go to the elders and talk to them. And so I went, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 houses down to this elder that was down the road, and I asked her the question, said, why would I have these three words in my consciousness? And she said that she said you should meet with, it's really interesting too, there's the Lummi tribe with Margaret Green, the Nooksack tribe with Dorothy Charles, and the third one would be the Upper Skagit tribe with Sherman Williams Kayakan. Said you go to each one of those and you ask them that question, and then you come back to me and we'll talk about it. So I thought, oh, this would be interesting. And so sure enough, I went to visit Margaret and spent probably half a day with her, and she sent me over to go to Dorothy. She said, I'll give Dorothy a call and know you're on your way. So I went to Dorothy's in Nooksack, and she unfolded probably 5 hours, 6 hours of knowledge, of wisdom, teachings. And she cooked me dinner that night, and Margaret cooked lunch for me, and then she put me up for the night. And then the next morning after breakfast, she sent me on my way to the third tribe, and that was Kayakan, Sherman Williams, and I spent a half a day with him. And he shared story after story after story. Beautiful. They're all just really rich teachings. But I remember leaving his house after lunch and getting ready to head back to the rest, back to Swinomish, and to be with the elder there. And I said, she's going to ask me, what does this mean? And I thought, I just really don't know I don't know. The stories were so deep and so valuable and so relatable, but they didn't point directly toward one with creation. At least I didn't see it at that time. So I went back to Maxine, and I said, thank you for sending me to visit these three elders. It was probably the best 2 days that I've had for a long time, but I'm not sure exactly what one with creation means yet. And so she shared this story with me, and the story tied it all together. And I realized that at that point that there's a reason why, I believe anyway, there's a reason why we didn't write this down. It's because when I go to the elders' homes and I sit in their living rooms and they prepare food for me, and it's really about developing relationships, mutually respectful relationships. And once you're able to do that, then the ancestors, they come in and they're sitting there with us, and they're basically helping to fine-tune these parts of us that have been still for some time. Especially in me, I was pretty ignorant in those days, and really, what it came to find out was that before contact and up until there's still a few that use it, but only a handful. When we go into ceremony, our people, our Coast Salish people, the elders would stand up, the healers would stand up and they'd speak to us, and they'd offer a prayer, and they'd close every one of their prayers with the words that loosely are that translate into one with creation, one with creation. What I realized is that you can't bring that out of a book or out of a notepad. You can't bring that lived experience out of that. You can invite the ancestors in to be there with you, to help you navigate through all of this. And so the story itself, I remember how important it was for the elders to remind me of this, that said, you don't change one letter, you don't change one word. This story that I'm going to share with you, you don't change anything. You do it exactly as I say it went. And I thought that's so beautiful, because it's really about that relationship of mutual respect and that trust and that integrity that goes with saying yes to that. And I think that's the power of the story for me.
Wow. That's very powerful. Well, we're coming to our conclusion. So I guess to conclude, I would invite you then, if you have any final thoughts or final words or final teachings to share with us.
Wow. I believe that every human being was created for a purpose, and that all of us have this spiritual DNA that brings us back to the Creator of all, brings us back to the voices and the presence of our ancestors who walked on this land. And today, what the elders have said to me is that we're stepping into the prayers of our ancestors at this time. I asked the elders at one point in the conversation, there was 13 of them that we called together. We asked them to, I shouldn't say selected, they were willing to allow us to honor them for the way they carried themselves through life. And they came, we invited them together, we placed Pendleton blankets on them, and we had this beautiful ceremony. And then we asked them to share their life with us. And they shared and shared and shared. And at the end of the 13 of them, when they completed their work, we asked them, would you have time for one more question? And they were sitting around the fire, and they were just so happy to be there. And so I asked the question, I said, well, it seems obvious to me that before we enter into this physical form, we come from spirit, this sacred journey of the spirit. We enter into this physical form, and we stay for a short time, whether that be 1 second or 100 years. It really doesn't, the time is still just a small, compared to when we leave again and we go back to spirit, go back to that beautiful place. So please, can you share with us, what does it really mean for us to be here in this physical form for such a short time? And so the elders, they spoke to each other in our language and Vishusi. And they laughed and they cried and they told stories to each other, and it went on for a while. And then they selected one elder to speak for them. He stood up and he said, it's really, we want to thank you, first of all, for feeding us, for spreading the table, for inviting in all our relatives to be here to witness this work, and for blanketing us and for honoring us in that manner. Thank you for this fire. Thank you for all this. Said it's really a good question that you ask. And we came up with this understanding that the reason we enter into this physical form is to learn as much as we can about our culture and the cultures that surround us, and to take that knowing of our culture and to turn around and to hand it on to our next generation that's coming. We hand it on to them so that this line, this beautiful woven line of spirit, will live on. It seems to me that life is rather simple when you break it down, and that we just lost our way is all, and now it's time for us to come back.
Thank you so much. I look forward to finding our way back with you. Thank you for your great teaching, your great spirit, your enormous heart, your wisdom and your sacrifice. I'm deeply grateful to have shared this time with you and to learn from these stories, to have been with you.
It's really it's our responsibility to pass whatever we are able to receive in this sacred manner, to pass it on. I remember this, that the elders, because there are so many questions that came in, that I had, I should say. How do we know who's deserving of this knowledge? How do we know who's ready for this? And they just smiled and said that this knowledge was a gift to us, and there's no price tag on it, and we have no authority. The only responsibility we have is to share it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.